Okay, so I'm making this series of videos to develop something, the working title of which is the PHI tutorials. And the first video, I'm going to go back and label it. I don't think I labeled it, but on this subject was about problems. Okay, it was the video where I was talking about problems are, they aren't material. You have material situations. Problems are things we invent in order to provoke information about the situation, including predictive information. And then we can use the information to affect the situation. Okay, so we were just being honest about that. We're trying to change situations. What we call problems are really ways of looking at the situation to get information we hope will help us change that situation. Okay, so this is the second, and this one is on blame. Blame. Who is to blame for a situation? I guess you can figure out right away we're going to have a similar thing with blame that we had with problems. Okay, blame is related to problems. You have a problem and someone is to blame for the problem. And this is just a way of locating, what more neutral term? Responsibility. And to fast forward, we're going to find out, we don't look at things as blame, we look at it as responsibility. But it's good to look at it as blame as well as an exercise, precisely because of the negative connotation. Responsibility for a negative situation. All right. When you look at blame, since it's related to the problems, and you can have any number of problems that you can extract from a situation, each of which lay the responsibility focused in a different area, you're not going to expect to have 100% blame for anything. Why? Because if the blame has to do with the unacceptable situation, seeing a particular problem or unacceptable situation, you're going to be involved with that. So, you're going to have responsibility. For example, some little responsibility. For example, that you were involved. Okay, with the example, if you had a friend that's abusing you, there's the responsibility of them doing the abuse. There's also the responsibility of the problem of, well, why do you still be friends with him? Okay, so I think just to make a commentary on human nature, it's probably a lot of the times, most of the times even, that we think it's 100% someone's blame and zero of ours. It's really more like 50-50. But when I'm using the word abuse, we're invoking a lot more than that. So let's say this abusive person is 99% responsible and you're 1%. That's always what you're going to expect, some fraction. And if it's almost fully someone else's blame, it's still going to be some weird fractional percentage of blame if you're involved in the situation, right? Because that's what makes the connection. The fact that you're part of the situation means that this state of the situation could be associated to you ultimately just through your passivity, if nothing else, by saying you should have called to some action, being involved that you didn't do. Now, blame is a touchy term. Some people don't want to think about that term. Why? Because nobody wants to be blamed. It's okay to take responsibility, but people don't want to be blamed per se. Now, when we're sidestepping problems, often the issue is to sidestep the blame. But we have to face that we don't want to always sidestep problems. If your neighbor comes over to your house and starts verbally abusing your 5-year-old, you know, how is that situation going to change? You cannot change that other person. If they are to blame primarily for that situation entirely, in terms of I've left certain details out. It's other details that'll bring your responsibility in. Let's say they come do that and you say, hey, stop talking that way. Okay. What have you done? You were in the other room. You changed your behavior and came in there and said this, made this behavior, that statement, in an attempt to change their behavior so they would be convinced. Let's say they keep yelling at your kid. So you get irate and you berate them. You're like, fuck, I'm going to beat you up, stop them. Again, you've changed, even though they are 99% responsible for what's going on. You're taking responsibility. And the only thing you can work on is your 1%. So you took your 1% that was just mind your own business in another room. You changed that to 1% contribution that's you in the room. Then you're changing it to being a dangerous looking person. all trying to convince them. Let's say they keep doing it, and so yeah, you take the next step and you start beating on them. And then suddenly they go, okay, okay, and they leave. Even then, you did not, we consider that direct force, but the reality is no, they still decided to stop. They could have decided earlier. That's when they decided, because they could have kept doing it even after you were beating them up, right? So they just made a decision that was based on you changing their situation, okay? And in the end, if you are going to change, to decide to go address the 99% problem that only somebody else can actually solve, you're going to do that by changing the 1% you contribute. And so this is the trick always, figuring out how to change our contribution in order to affect the situation. You know, I think it's important to remember honesty in there for not being manipulative and to avoid the easy outs and the cheap tricks. And to, you know, yeah, sometimes just forget about it, move on. Sometimes, no, I'm not going to ignore the situation. So that's blame. And the next one is on mistakes. Maybe the next few, I'm not sure, it might take a while.